Well, hello and welcome to tonight's Alabama adventure. Tonight we're going to take another trip through the shadow regions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a little UFO story that happened to me and a very good friend of mine, I guess about 45 or so years ago, maybe a little bit longer than that. It was back around 1971 is whenever this took place, and this was he and I first UFO sighting. It was certainly our first UFO encounter. We really don't know what all happened that night. We know what we saw, and that's what I'm going to tell you about in just a few minutes. Anyway, if you remember, it was back in 1971 when I made my first Bigfoot sighting. So I don't know what was going on around here back in 1971, but I do know that there was Bigfoot sightings. Of course, now, as I've said in some previous videos, we didn't even know what a Bigfoot was back then. But we knew what a UFO was back then. We knew this thing got after us. We didn't know what it was. It chased us a little ways. It scared us real good, and that's what I'm going to tell you about tonight. And but anyway, we're going to go out on location first. There's what I'd like to do, is to go out to where this encounter actually happened, kind of show you the lay of the land, the road that we went down, what all happened there, and then I'm going to come back and tell you the whole story on the whole thing. But anyway, that's what we'll do first. We'll go out on location. I'll sort of give you an idea of what's going on whenever I went and made this video. And but before we do that, I'm going to let Carol tell you this.
And now, from the tail end of the Appalachian mountain chain in the heart of the South, this is Alabama Adventures.
Alrighty, here we are. Now we're going to get this Alabama adventure started, and I'm going to tell you where we're at, and we'll get underway. We're right here at the intersection. I don't know if you can see the sign or not, but we're at the intersection of Highway 22 and Tallapoosa County Road 79, right down through there. And that road right there will carry on to Horseshoe Bend if you ever up this way. But anyway, what I wanted to show you is this little store right here. This is where we made our first stop this particular night. We went in here and picked up some Cokes and just some other stuff to eat on. One thing that we did get that night I'm going to tell you about real quick was pickled eggs. All right, we got by now. Didn't get the four-wheeler on there, but anyway, we'll try to do another video before we get them on there someday. But anyway, what I was going to tell you about the pickled eggs is we got to where we just bought pickled eggs by the dozen. They were that good back then, and I still enjoy one now every once in a while. But anyway, this is our first stop of the night. Was right here where we got us some gas. We got us some stuff to eat and drink, as we always did when we were out shining for deer. Okay, now we're out on location today, and I want to try to tell you this story about the UFO that me and my friend encountered. And as I said, I'm going to call him JB. That way I can kind of refer to him a little bit easier while we're telling this. And anyway, after we left the store that I just showed you earlier, where we picked us up something to eat and something to drink, we came up Highway 22. Then we turned on, I believe it's Mountain Springs Road. We went all the way to the end of it, and now we're on Frog Eye Road. And this is Frog Eye Road. Okay, now, and as you come down this dirt road, right down here at the bottom of the hill, you come to an old a wooden bridge. And I'll tell you about it when we get there. Okay, now, as we neared this old wooden bridge right here, we, about this speed, we just pulled right up on it with the front tires. And we stopped. And I'm going to swing the camera around over here to the other side. We'll turn that air down just a little bit. I've got the window down. I know that's not a very good picture out through there now, but it's grown up a lot from what it was. I have got my window down about halfway, so that may not look real good. But anyway, what we did, we took the spotlight and shined right out through there, because back in 1971 when this happened, there was a pasture out there, and we always shined it for deer to see if there was anything right here along this little creek bank feeding, and had plenty of water and that type of stuff. But anyway, right now is about the time that the UFO encounter began. Okay, now as you can see now, in the last few years, this has a lot of trees has been cut. When this happened, the trees grew right out to the road, and a lot of trees and limbs like on those trees right there, hung over the road to kind of block your view and everything. But anyway, I'll pull to the end of the bridge right here and we'll take on off. And I'll tell you what happened. We came across the bridge and we started up the dirt road. As I said, it doesn't look like it does now. Right on up the road, it will a little bit. But as we began coming along through here, our lights went off. And we went under some limbs that were hanging over the road. The lights came back on. And that's what we began to notice in just a little bit. That when we were under tree limbs, our lights and the motor and the gauges in the car ran, and when we came out in the open, they would go off. Anyway, I wish this land was like it was back then, where I could tell you a little bit better about it. But anyway, all through here, as we were coming up this road and up this hill, our lights, the gauges in the car, sometimes the motor. Not every time the motor would cut off, but sometimes the motor would cut off, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. Alright, we've got a little bit further on up the road, and the land looks more like it did on the night that this particular encounter happened. And when I get around this curve here, if you'll notice up through there, there are places where limbs and the foliage and stuff hangs over the road. You can see that a little bit better. This may be a little bit loud because I've got my windows down. And right here is a place I'm going to tell you about a little bit later in another video about some other UFO encounters right out there. So it just makes you wonder what's going on over here. There's been so many UFO encounters in this one particular area of Chambers County. Anyway, I'll get right on there. A lot of this wood has been cut off the side of the road, I noticed. It's certainly not like it was back in those days. But you can see the shadows in the road. That's where limbs and hang over the road. And that's where our lights would come back on whenever we would encounter these type places. It may just be better just to go on back to the studio and just tell the whole story now that you've kind of got an idea of where we're at and the lay of the land. But I will go right up here and show you one other little thing real quick before we do that. Alright, I'm filming this video by myself, and I'm having to change gears, so it sort of got me in a bind that once in a while. But when we got to this end of the road up here, where this intersection is, we made an immediate right turn right here, and we were driving so fast by now that we pretty much slid around through here sideways. And when we got right up here, we went right down that road right there. I'm not going to go on down it. I'm going to go back to the studio and explain a little bit more about it to you. But anyway, to kind of give you an idea, we turned down this road. As I said, when we came around this curve, we were pretty much sideways. We were driving so fast. Well, all right, that was our little field trip, I guess, for the day, and we'll get on into the full details of this encounter that night. If you have noticed in a couple of videos we've done lately, we've been in this same area, and I've been telling you some other things that went on over there, and I just really hadn't said a whole lot about this particular area while I have been doing my paranormal investigations over my lifetime, and certainly this area right here has spanned a lifetime of all type of paranormal encounters, not only for me but for some other people as well. And I just, as I said, I really hadn't said much about this place, but I feel like now, as I am getting older and know I won't be here heck in another 61 years, I feel like I need to tell some of the things that has happened in this particular area. And if I do seem nervous, or if I seem nervous in that part of the video, I don't mean to be, but driving through there just brought back a lot of memories from that night. Every time I go down that road, it is just as if it has just happened. I can pretty much just lean and look out the window of the car or truck or whatever I may be in, and I can still see the bottom of that UFO that I'm about to tell you about. Alrighty, in the little field trip we took a while ago down there to show you the lay of the land, if you remember when at the beginning of it, as we turned on to the dirt road headed toward the old wooden bridge. Now that's where the story begins, and that's where the UFO sighting started, right down there at that bridge. We were out looking for deer. We had a spotlight. We didn't have a gun with us that night, but there was actually a time here in Alabama whenever you could actually hunt deer at night. There was absolutely no laws against it. And so many people got to doing it, and so many people got to killing cows. In this day, they couldn't tell the difference between a cow and a deer at night. That's what got a lot of laws passed over here about night hunting. and that type of stuff. But anyway, we weren't night hunting. As I said, it was legal for a while, but we were just out spotlighting to see if we could find where the deer were. And we always went down this road, this little road we called Bailey Dirt Road is what we call this, because of the Bailey family in this area owned a lot of land on either side. There was also a couple of other families that owned land on this particular dirt road, but the major people that owned the major part of land on this dirt road were Baileys. So that's what me and my friend JB always called this road, was Bailey Dirt Road. There's a paved road right beside it that was just called, there was a paved road right beside it that we used to do a lot of spotlighting in the pastures and that type of stuff where they had cows. But we never shot one of the cows. And but anyway, we called it Bailey Road. But what we're talking about tonight is Bailey Dirt Road. So anyway, we were going down Bailey Dirt Road because, as I showed you earlier, there was a little pasture to the right side of the bridge as you were going in the direction that we were going. And that was going to be our first field that we shined that night. And that's what we called it, was shining rather than spotlighting. We were going shining that night. So anyway, I know I may sound a little bit nervous, but it still brings back a lot of memories, and I can still see that UFO, as I said, and it just sort of makes you wonder what all did happen that night. I guess I need to do a regression. Get a lady that I know from Atlanta to come down. She's a very good regression therapist. I have worked with her on some other cases. I guess I need to get her to come do one on me sometime, and which I might, and if we do, I'll be certainly video it and put it on here to see exactly what did happen that night. But I may not do that. Sometimes it's better if you don't know some things that happen. It's what I have found out in paranormal research that I have done over my life. Anyway, I know I'm rambling, but anyway, I'm going to get on to the story right now. Okay, JB and I are in the car. We're rolling down the road pretty slow because we know he's going to stop there on the bridge. I know he's going to stop there on the bridge, and I'll shine the right side. He would shine the left side whenever the fields were on that side, and I would always shine on the right side because that's where I was riding. And that's where he rode, was on the left. He was a driver. But anyway, and he was a very good driver, and very few people I trusted as well as do him. And I have a little story, if I remembered at the end, I'm going to tell you about some of his driving. But anyway, we pulled up to the bridge, put the front tires of the car, which was a 1971 Ford Galaxy. It was a new car. It belonged to his father, and that's what we were in on this particular night. Anyway, let me just say this about that car. I believe the car had it did have a large V8 motor. I believe it was a 390 was what it was called back then. And it would take you for a ride, and we were glad of it this particular night because we wanted to get away from this thing as fast as we could, if we could. It just worked out that we couldn't get away from it. But anyway, getting back to the bridge, here we go. We pulled up on the bridge. I hang the spotlight out the window, and I shine the field. And we had got to where we could shine the field pretty quick. You just sort of swept the light across it, and if you didn't see some eyes, you just went on. But anyway, we didn't see any eyes in this particular field. We had from time to time, and we always shine this field, usually first every night. Anyway, whenever I get my arm back in and roll the window back up, which it had power windows, so anyway, I was letting the window back up, and JB began to let the car roll a little bit forward, and we came off the bridge. Now, in those days, as I said earlier in the video, there was a lot of tree limbs that hung over the road. Like whenever you were going down the road in the daytime, there was a lot of shadows. There was a lot of light places in this road where the sun shined through where there wasn't a tree. But as we inched along, I guess we got about 10 yards, or maybe not hardly that far, off the bridge, headed on up the road as we did a while ago. And our headlights went out. All right, in just a few seconds, they came back on. And this began to happen on and off, on and off. And sometimes JB said that all the gauges on the instrument panel were dying. So something was draining the power. Well, there was one time that the car actually went dead, but he pushed the gear shifter up in neutral, and the car kept rolling, and the lights came back on, and the motor fired back up. So we didn't know exactly what was going on. We kept inching on up the road because it was a pretty good little ways before we had another field to shine. This particular road had a lot of woods on it on either side, thick woods. Anyway, we had, as I said, we had a little ways to go to our next area that we were going to shine that night. But anyway, as we inched forward, this continued to happen. The lights would go off. Sometimes the instrument panel would die. Sometimes the motor would die. Then they would catch right back up. And what we noticed is the moon seemed to be very bright that night, but it was not the moon. What it was, it was this thing that was over the top of the car is what it's going to be whenever I get to that part. And I'm trying to work that way. And if I seem nervous, it's because I guess I'm just reliving it once again. But anyway, we kept inching on. Well, we didn't inch on up the road. We were just driving at a normal speed, probably about 25 or 30 miles an hour up there. And the lights and the instrument panel and the motor and all this stuff kept going on and off, on and off. And we noticed that there appeared to be a light like over the road, which we thought was the moonlight. But when you looked out into the woods, it was not that bright. It just seemed like a large circle of white light was around the car and a little bit in front of it. And JB said that when he was looking in the rearview mirror, that it was a little ways behind the car. So I just rolled down the window and stick my head out the window, sort of pull a part of my upper body out of the window to where I can look over the car to see what it is. And whenever I do, I say, well, I'm going to see what the heck's going on here. Well, that ain't exactly what I said, but I do try to not say anything out of the way on here. But you know how young boys are whenever they're out by themselves and everything. I guess we wanted to act and talk and look a little older than what we were. But anyway, that's what I said, something similar to, well, what the heck's going on? I want to see what the heck it is. So anyway, whenever I did, I just pulled myself through the window up to about my belt line. And when I did, that's when I saw something was over the car. And I looked at it for a few seconds. I think I looked at it for a few seconds. Might have been longer, might not have been long at all. But whenever I saw this thing, I was just... my breath was just taken. I was very shocked. I was very surprised. I was very frightened. All right, now whenever I do lean out and see this thing, and as I said, I was very frightened, I get back in the car just as quick as I can and sit down on the seat and go to letting the window back up. And that's what I tell JB. I said, there is something over the top of this car. And he wants to know what. And I, in some other words that I said that I won't use, I don't know. But anyway, it's a UFO. It's a flying saucer was what we called it back then. I said, it's a flying saucer. And we went a little bit further, and of course the lights were continuing to come on and off. So when I said that, JB mashes the gas down, and we take off down the dirt road, and we're going just as fast down that dirt road as he can hold it between the tree line. And I lean back out again, and this thing is still right over the top of us, and it's just over treetop level. Now let me kind of tell you what it looked like whenever I looked up under it. Of course, the whole bottom of this thing was white with a very brilliant fluorescent looking type light. But it was not an exact circle. It was kind of a circle that was divided into maybe about 3 sections, and I'll show you a little drawing of that. But anyway, on 3 other points of this thing, there were 3 other lights that shined down, as well as some circular lights in the middle of the thing. They were all very white. They were all very bright. They were lighting up the ground, part of the woods next to us. The car was completely lit up whenever I leaned out to where I could see the roof. And at one point, I actually just sat in the window. I just pulled on through the window to where my butt would sit right there on the top of the door. And as we were flying down the road, I had on a cap. And I lost that cap somewhere that night. I did go back over there the next day and found it laying in the middle of the road. But anyway, we were flying down the road. I was trying to hold on the best I could. JB was doing a very good job of holding the car in the road as we were giving it everything it had. Because we didn't know what this thing was. And if we had told JB's dad how fast we were driving and what we were doing to this car, he would have certainly never let us have it again. But I won't have to worry about him hearing about it now. He did pass away a few years ago, and he was a very good friend of mine, as JB was and still is today. So anyway, it seemed like we were never going to get to the end of this road where the only house we knew of was probably a mile or maybe 2 miles away. but that's where we were headed. And in the video, you remember me coming when we came to the end of the road, and I said we turned here so fast that the car went sideways, and which it did. We didn't even slow up for this intersection coming up. I was in the car. I was back in the car at this time, and when we went around that curve, I remember the car going completely sideways as we went down the hill. JB got it back under control, and we took off, and this thing was still over the top of us. The woods were still white. The car was still extremely lit up. All inside the interior was extremely lit up. And if you remember the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where right there at the beginning, whenever, I can't remember the guy's name, but anyway, right there when he was sitting at the railroad track and he was looking at a map or something, how the interior of that truck just lit up bright white. That's the way the interior of this car was. It was a very bright white. You could see the dirt in the floor. You could see the food that we had in there, the Coke bottles and stuff that had already gotten lost and were rolling around in the floorboard. You could see everything in that car with this bright light. But as fast as we could, we went down this other road, and we finally made it to someone's house, who was also a very good friend of ours. We'd been knowing him a long time. As a matter of fact, he and JB were real good friends, but they both had very fast sport cars, or hot rods, I guess you would call it back in those days, and they raced each other a lot. And I'll have to tell you about that one time, about one of their races. But anyway, as we got to his house, we come to a sliding stop in the front yard. We just slid into the front yard. JB had hit the brakes, and I remember the car kind of turning sideways whenever we hit the wet grass, because there was dew or frost or something on that grass, and it was wet. And I remember when we came off the dirt road and went into his yard that we slid for a pretty good little ways. And let me scratch my nose. I don't know why my nose goes to itching when I'm telling this kind of stuff, but it always does. Anyway, we jumped out of the car. We were headed to the porch. His porch had a roof over it, as most porches do. But anyway, this particular porch had a roof over it, and that's where we were headed. We wanted to get in the house is what we wanted to do. And you may laugh about that, but we were scared. We didn't know what this thing was, what it was up to, or what it was fixing to do to us, or may have done, and we just didn't know anything about it. But as we jumped out of the car, I remember JB slamming it up in park, and we both jumped out of the car. The doors just sprang open, I guess, as we both opened them about the same time, and we started running toward his porch. And when we did, this thing was still hovering over our car. And we ran up on the porch and started beating on the door and hollering and calling his name, our friend, to let us in, let us in. And as we stood on the porch, this UFO that was still only at treetop level slowly drifted off to our right side, which I guess would have been south, over some trees, because the woods grew up pretty close to his front yard across this other dirt road. And he had a large workshop and a barn out there in the little field across. But as we stood there beating on the door, trying to get him to come to the door, to open the door to let us in, this thing floated across his barn, then floated across the tops of the trees and out of sight. And by the time he got, he had already gone to bed. And by the time he got out of bed and got to the door to let us in, it was already gone. And he didn't ever get to see it. But we certainly did. We saw it very well that night. JB could lean over and look through the windshield of the car, and he could see the upper end of it. I was leaning out the passenger side window. I could see the entire thing. Okay, that was our UFO encounter that night, and now I do want to give you a few other little quick details on it. As I was looking at it, I now would estimate this thing to be somewhere around 20 feet wide. And whenever we got on the porch to where we could see the entire craft and the top of it better, because he did have some several street lights in his yard out there, and it kind of, you could see it against the night sky. I'm going to say this thing was 15 or 20 feet tall. It was somewhat cone-shaped. I'll show you a picture that I painted of it several years later. I will also show you a picture of it I painted sometime later, so to have as a record. I certainly wanted to keep a record of this sighting because this was the first UFO that we had ever encountered, that I had ever seen. I had heard about UFOs, and I had read about them in some magazines. I had heard a little bit like it on the shows In Search Of and things like that back then of UFOs. Really didn't too much believe in UFOs. I always thought there would be some way to explain it, or people were just making it up. But we certainly didn't make this up this night, and that was my first encounter with a UFO. Okay, I got through with the video, and I started putting it together, and there was one other little detail that I had left out that I do want to tell you now about the night that we encountered this UFO. If you remember the part where we were going down the dirt road, we were headed to our friend's house to try to find safety, I guess, get away from this thing. When we pulled into the yard, his yard, there was hardly any trees or anything like that in his particular yard. Now, there were across the road, like in a wooded section over there. But in his yard, there were no trees. And whenever JB and I jumped out of the car, something that I remembered and I commented on when we got on the porch and that type of stuff, is when we jumped out of the car running toward the porch, this thing was over our head, and it was almost close enough you could touch it. That's what I told him after everything was over with that night. I believe if you'd have got a running start and jumped, that you could have almost touched the bottom of this UFO. It was actually that close over our car as we came down that dirt road, or at least when we were in the yard, it had hovered down that low. It had to stay at treetop level as we were coming down the road. But as we came into the yard, which was a pretty good sized little yard, this thing had almost sat down on top of the car. And I remember him saying something about it too, as he was looking out the windshield at one point and could actually see the bottom of the craft as he looked out the windshield. Of course, I was hanging out the window most of the time. That was one little detail that I did want to add into the video. Okay, now something else I want to go into very briefly. I won't take a lot of time with this. Guess you could call this a sidetrack. But anyway, on this picture, this particular picture here, I get Dorothy to put it up one more time while I'm talking about it. As you can see, it's kind of a dark picture as it was at nighttime. It's not a real photograph. This is a painting that I did. And it is painted at night because that's when we saw this UFO, was around sometime between 9 and probably 11 o'clock that night. But anyway, I had a man several years ago who was a UFO investigator who claimed to be with MUFON. I'm not sure if he was or not, but he kind of turned me against the MUFON organization, the way that he would do and things he would say and act and that type of stuff. He actually spent too much money for somebody that was just footing the bill himself. I always believe he was government backed, or somebody to come in here and find out about these UFOs that we were sighting over this way. That's just my opinion, but he spent entirely more money, a whole lot more money than what I can spend on paranormal investigation. But that was one thing that kind of threw a red flag at me. But he asked me several times some of these pictures, and I'm going to show you some of these other pictures later on in some other videos that I have done of some UFOs. He asked me, and he complained about it. Why did I draw them at night? Was that just an easy way to draw them or whatever? Well, that was when I saw them, and he wanted me to draw them like it was a daytime sighting with a blue sky and a bright background and that type of stuff, to where you can see the UFO plainer, and I would draw it plainer. But what I was trying to document is as accurate as I possibly could of what either I had seen or somebody else had seen and told me about. And if the sighting was at nighttime, then the painting would be at nighttime. If the sighting was in the daytime, I have some other paintings that I've done of daytime sightings. But it just kind of bothered me that he wanted everything done his way. And as I said, he claimed to be with MUFON, but I'm not exactly sure that he was. One other little thing that I do want to add, it was just one day last week that I was in our local convenience store here. We only have one convenience store in town. We have a convenience store, gas station, then we have a regular gas station here in town. But anyway, I was in the convenience store, gas station, one day last week, as I said, and the man that I'm calling JB come walking up and spoke, and I hadn't seen him in, I guess, maybe a year or so was the last time I had seen him. He also has had some major health problems now. But anyway, we were talking, and he just brought that up again about the UFO, and we stood there in the store, and we talked about it a while, and several people got their ears full from listening to what we were talking about. And then we also, after we had mentioned that we had seen a UFO, we had some other people in there to tell us some other UFO sighting stories that they had seen over the years. Some of them are pretty recent. And that's usually the way that it goes with me. If I ever start talking about UFOs or anything paranormal to somebody, you always have somebody else that it's not just a few people that see these things and have paranormal encounters. It's just about everybody. But a lot of people don't want to talk about it, and that's fine with me if you don't. If you do, I'm always ready and willing to listen. Now, let me also add before we go, this happened while we were in probably the 10th or 11th grade. And I remember me and JB going back into school the next morning, and we were still very excited about what we had seen that night. And we told a lot of people in school that day, and a lot of people laughed at us. A lot of people made fun of us. Some people took us serious. I remember one particular girl that I had a crush on back then, and I guess still do now. But anyway, I remember her whenever we were telling it. She just kind of smiled. She didn't say anything out of the way or anything like that, and I appreciated that. So right now, what I want to do is to show you this a drawing that I did several years ago of the underside of this craft. It, as I said, wasn't exactly round. It had 3 points to it, kind of the best I can remember the way that it looked to me. It also had 3 larger lights on at 3 points around it. And they shine down like spotlights or floodlights, whatever you want to call it, and they were very white. And they were very bright, very white, lit up the car extremely well. Also, I want you to look at this painting right here that I did. Now, this kind of shows the craft as an overall, as we saw it, as it drifted away from the man's porch that night over his barn. That's when I could tell more about the shape and the design, or whatever you want to call it, of the craft. As you can see, it's kind of cone shaped, as in an upside down cone. It didn't come into a very sharp point, but it also had some type of light on top of it that you could see that there was some type of dome light on this thing. And anyway, the reason I painted it like this was because so it would be exactly as it was when we saw it at nighttime. Okay, now I've got a couple little sidetrack stories that I want to tell you about JB. And when I start telling these, I know the people around here is going to recognize exactly who I'm talking about. And they're going to wonder why I didn't use his other nickname. But I do try to keep people's identities as confidential as I possibly can. Although it may not work that way with this one, but I have talked to him lately, and I believe he's going to do an interview with a UFO that he also seen a few months ago with me. So anyway, at least his name will be known then, I guess. Anyway, what I want to tell you about the race that I was talking about earlier is JB and another guy used to race a lot. They kind of had a little rivalry, I guess. One of them had a 67 Ford Fairlane, and the other one, well, that was JB. And the other one had a 69 Chevelle. I believe it was a 69. It was 68 or 69. And both cars would fly. And I'm going to tell you about one of those rides that I took in one of those cars in just a minute or two. But anyway, what it was, they were going to have a drag race one night. And if you remember in a video or two back, I was talking about the Little Red Schoolhouse. Well, that was where a lot of drag races took place back in the early 1970s. Now, I do know that drag racing like that was illegal back then, and it's still illegal now. But anyway, we didn't just get out there and have a race and go down the road, and if somebody came up on us, well, they were just in a wrong place at the wrong time. That wasn't the way we did. Back then, if you remember, CB radios were real big, very popular back then, and we would send somebody on down the road a little bit further to another intersection, and they would sit down there, and if they saw anything coming, then they would radio back to us on the CB to let us know not to have the race right then until the road was clear. We did try to practice safety, I guess, back then, the best that we could. But it was a kind of a long little straightaway in there to where you had plenty of room to run the race. and then where the finish line always was, you had about another quarter of a mile to slow down and everything. And so anyway, what happened over there one night, JB and this other guy that had the Chevelle was fixing to have a race, and that's what they did. And they took off, and they were going down the road, and one of them got a little sideways, and one of them got a little bit behind. And JB, the passenger side of his car, hit the driver's side on the back quarter panel of the other car. So JB's front fender had a pretty good dent in it, as did this Chevelle had a pretty good dent in the quarter panel. But I'm telling you that so I can tell you about JB's dad. Anyway, during the race, they did touch each other, and they did lose a little bit of control up through there, but it was where they could save both cars. Nobody got hurt. Nobody had a wreck or tore up any car any worse than a couple of dents on each one. So anyway, the next morning, well, after the race, everybody just went on home. It kind of broke up and everything, and as I said, everybody went on home. So anyway, I went over to JB's the next morning because we were going to do something that afternoon or that day or whatever. And his car was sitting out in the yard with this dent on the front fender. So his dad, who is a real laid-back, cool guy back then, he was somebody that I thought a lot of, and really liked to listen to him talk. And the thing, he never raised his voice. He never got mad about anything. But anyway, we were out there in the yard talking about the race and this, that, and the other, and JB's dad comes walking out the door. And we're just talking to him like nothing's happened. Everything's going on fine, and he's carrying on a conversation with us like he always did. And he walks around the car, and he sees this dent in the passenger side of the front fender up there around the headlight. I was trying to remember exactly what I was supposed to say. Sometimes my old mind just goes blank. But anyway, I was trying to remember exactly what he said. But anyway, he walked around, and he asked JB, he said, what happened? And he always talked real low. I talk a little bit loud on here so the mic will pick up. But he asked JB what happened. And he told him that he hit the back end of another car last night. So his dad just turned around just as calm and not mad or anything. He said, well, were you drag racing? And he said, yes, sir. And he said, where was the other car hit at? And of course, JB told him on the rear quarter panel on the driver's side. So JB's dad looks at it, and he rubs his hand over the dent a time or two, and he said, so let me get this straight. And now keep in mind that this guy's talking real low. He, as I said, he never raised his voice. He never got mad. He never got excited, upset about anything. He said, so let me get this straight. He said, you got a dent on the front end here on the headlight, and the other car has got a dent on the rear end of the car. And he said, yes, sir. He said, so that means that you were behind. The other car was winning. He said, yes, sir. And so JB's dad has not cracked a smile. He's just talking real serious, like he was a crew chief over a NASCAR race car. And anyway, there's what he tells him, that the other car was ahead, that he was losing the race. So JB's dad said, well, we can't have that. We're not going to have that. He said he talked to him a few minutes about the race and what happened. Did he shift right and this kind of stuff? Just like it was nothing to be in this race. He was more concerned of JB losing the race than he was him actually being in a drag race, and an illegal drag race. Okay, now, so they keep discussing this race, just as I said, just as if it was a NASCAR legal race on a racetrack. And after they talk in a little while, JB's dad goes back in the house, makes a phone call. And then just a little bit, he comes back out, and he says he has called so-and-so's junkyard, and they have a motor over there that he wants. Now, back in the 1970s, Ford produced a Cleveland motor, a Windsor motor, and I can't remember the name of the other motor, but supposedly this motor that he had inquired about at a junkyard was a more high-performance motor, like for drag racing, and I guess just racing and high speed. And anyway, in just a little bit, JB's dad comes walking out back on the porch, and he jumps off the porch there next to the car, and walks over to JB, and he's got like $300 or $400 cash in his hand, and he hands it to him, and he says, I just called so-and-so's junkyard. I won't call their name, but it was over in Georgia is where this junkyard was, and that'll come into play in just a minute. But anyway, I said, I just called them, and they've got a more high-performance motor, and he called what type it was. Like I said, I can't remember if it was a Cleveland, a Windsor, or the other Ford engine that they were producing back in the 70s. But he said, what I want you and Jim there to do, if he's got time talking to me, if I had time, is to run over to Georgia. Y'all go in the truck and go over there and get this motor, and said, that's what we're going to do this afternoon when you get back, is we're going to take this motor out of this car, and we're going to put this high-performance motor in there. He said, if you are going to race, he said, we are not going to lose. And I thought that, I just busted out laughing whenever his dad said that. And that was exactly what we did that afternoon. We got in JB's dad's truck, and we rode to Georgia, and we went to the junkyard, and we paid cash for this motor, and they loaded it, and we brought it back to JB's house that afternoon. Let me also say this about JB's dad. He was an electronic genius. There was nothing electronic or that type of stuff that he could not work on, that he could not build, that he could not repair. And he had a lot of insights, I guess, or knew what was coming in the future. I remember one time we were watching something on TV, and somebody had a telephone in their car. Now, it was connected in the console, and you actually talked on a old handheld telephone receiver is what was on this TV show. And that's what I told JB's dad. I was sitting in the house. We were sitting in there eating. I believe we were eating lunch one day. And that's what I told him. I said, I'd like to have a telephone in my car, but I bet it wouldn't pick up way out here where we live. You'd probably have to be in a large town close to a tower or something. And he said back in the 1970s, he said someday there will be handheld telephones that you can more than likely talk to anybody all over the world from your car or out in the woods, in your house. He said someday house phones will be obsolete. And now house phones are pretty much obsolete, and he was pretty much right. But he was always doing something with me and JB that was very interesting. I know back then in some magazines you could order a catalog to where you could order these little rockets. And some of you probably have seen that ad in the in magazines and stuff. There was a catalog that you could order these little model rockets, and you could actually order an engine that went in these things. And I can remember him and JB coming by my house several times whenever he would get off work. And he would always say something funny. He'd say whenever he would pull up, or JB might knock on the door, they might just blow if they'd called and said they were coming. And he'd always say something like, the countdown has begun. Hurry, we got to get down there to get this rocket launched. Just like it was real at Cape Kennedy that they were fixing to blast one off. But I always had a good time with him. He was a lot of fun to be around. He was a very interesting man. He was a very highly intelligent man. And we would all go down there to the football field. You could get on the football field back there. We didn't drive the car out there, but they would let you get on the football field, and we would blast these rockets off. And I'll have to tell you about that sometime. Now, sometimes when I'm doing these videos, I leave a little detail or two out until I get through with the whole story, and that's what I have to do is go back, and that's what I'm going to have to do on this one. If you remember earlier, I said sometimes we sent somebody on down the road to another intersection that could watch the road ahead to make sure that nobody was coming up. That's what we done sometimes when our local police wasn't around. We had a couple of policemen back then, and if you remember a video I did, I guess about a year or so ago, or maybe a little bit longer, I told you about one that we had whenever an escaped convict came into town on railroad. But anyway, I won't go into that again. But anyway, you might want to go back and watch that sometime. I believe this was the same policeman. Sometimes we just go by there and tell him that we're going down to the Little Red Schoolhouse. That everybody knew where it was, and they knew what it was. We just go by the police station and say, we're going down to the Little Red Schoolhouse. We're going to have a drag race down there. If you want to come on down. And sometimes the policeman would come down, and he would sit down at the other intersection in case a car started coming up the Frog Eye Road is where it was now. In case a car started coming up Frog Eye Road, and he would turn the blue light on, and they would stop and not get in the way of the race. He also bet on the races, and sometimes when he was off duty, sometimes when he wasn't off duty, he would just pull the police car down there on the side of the road, and we'd all have the best time and watch a race and have a race. I don't think he ever raced the police car down there, though, although it would have probably been okay with him to do it at the time. But back in those days, the police we had here were just mostly local people from around the town, or not much further than from around the county. And everybody knew them, and we all got along fine back in those days. We all had a great time back in those days. But that was just another little bit of information I wanted to pass along about the drag races we used to have at the Little Red Schoolhouse. Okay, I have one other little sidetrack story I'm going to tell you, and it's concerning this car and this motor that I was talking about just a moment or two a while ago. Anyway, what we did that night, or that afternoon when we got in, and it went on into the night, it was probably around midnight when we finished taking the motor out of the fair lane, and we got the other one installed and got all the wires and all the hoses and everything connected. We got in there and turned the key, and it fired right up. So JB and I took it down the road, went down Highway 22, and this thing would take you for a ride. And there had been several trips that just took a few minutes that we went pretty long distances, seemed like. But I want to tell you about this one little trip we took over on I-85 in Georgia one afternoon. Now, what we needed was a place where we could open this thing up to see what it would do. We already knew it would go, that it would put the speedometer hand out of sight. Now, what I'm talking about there, I know on a lot of cars now, the speedometers are round, and they just go like a clock. They just go all the way around. But on a 67 Fairlane, if you've ever seen one of the dashboards where the speedometer is, or if you haven't, you might want to check it out online so you know what I'm talking about. The speedometer was a long rectangular like box up there on the dash, and it went from 0 to 120. And I'll just hold my hand up and show you. It would like be on 0, and as you picked up speed, it would just sort of lay over sideways. And if you got over 120, the speedometer hand would actually go down beside behind a part of the speedometer to where you couldn't see it. So keep that in mind whenever I'm telling you this story. JB's dad had actually asked him a time or two whenever he and I had gone somewhere, like out on a double date. We used to do that sometimes. Usually we went in my car because the girls were a lot of time afraid to ride with JB in this car that would go that fast. There was a couple that were ready for it, but most of the time we went in my car like on double date. But anyway, JB's dad had asked him a few times how fast had he had that car going since we'd put that new motor in it. And he'd say, well, I've had it 100, 120, or something like that. But what we were wanting to do is to open this thing up. We would have really liked to have got up at Talladega Racetrack, but there wasn't any way you could rent it, or no telling what it would have cost to rent at a racetrack back in those days, or even now. But we just wanted to open this thing up to see what it would do. So that's what we did one afternoon. JB and I went over to Georgia. We went to the junkyard again for something. As a matter of fact, JB had a sister that lived in the same town where this junkyard was, and I believe her husband actually worked at this junkyard. Was how they knew about it, that you could get motors and parts and just whatever you needed there. But anyway, we had gone over to the junkyard one afternoon over in Georgia. We had got whatever part we went over after. We didn't need a motor. No, we sure didn't need an engine that afternoon. But anyway, we had gone to Georgia. We came back through Noonan, I believe is the town that we came through. And I believe the restaurant we stopped at to eat was a Hardee's. I don't think Hardee's had been around very long back then. But back in those days, if you remember, if you were alive back in the 70s and on into the 80s, Hardee's had one of the best hamburgers that's ever been put on the market. That was a Hardee's a Deluxe. I don't know why they don't make those now. That was the best hamburger that I have ever eaten anywhere, anytime. It was just a real good hamburger. Anyway, JB and I had went in and we had ordered something to eat, and we had after we got in there, we decided that we would just get it to go. So that's what we told him. If you would just put it in a bag, we just need this to go. We need to get on home because we already had something else in mind that we were going to do. Keep that in mind also that we had been in Hardee's and had hamburger, French fries, and a Coke there that we were eating on. One thing about it, it sure wasn't hard to eat this hamburger or drink this Coca-Cola this afternoon because if you put it to your mouth, it was going down. There wasn't no way getting around that. And that's what I was doing. We were flying down I-85. I'm still munching on a Hardee's Deluxe and drinking a Coke. Anyway, between some bites somewhere, I asked him, I said, how fast are we going? And we were going about 120. And, well, by now we were in a fourth gear. And we were going about 120. And he pulls it out of, well, he actually pulls it out of third gear and go into fourth gear. And then he mashes down on it. And this thing has still got power, and you can still tell we're still picking up speed. Cause we're passing cars just like you were riding down by a picket fence. Then it is just our luck coming up the other side of I-85 across the medium is a car that has got Georgia Highway Patrol or Georgia State Patrol, something like that written on it. And it's a brown car back in those days. I don't know what color they are today. But it was a brown car and it had a blue light on it. And as we neared this thing, the blue light came on. And that's when JB pushed it onto the floor. And your head went back like that whenever he did. And I turned around to look out the back mirror, and he told me not to be looking out the back mirror. They would know we were doing something illegal. But I know we were flying down the road at over 120 miles an hour, and this state trooper or patrol, whatever they call themselves over there, he came across the medium just as you've seen done like in Smokey and the Bandit. That's what it reminded me of that afternoon. But he come across the medium, and we could hear the siren on the car, and we just pretty much went off and left him. We just, he didn't ever get up behind us, really. We just left him. We kept going on down the road, and we didn't see another highway patrolman or state trooper, whatever, as I said, whatever they're called over there. But we kept going down the road, and since we hadn't seen anything, JB said, well, I guess we'll just take the next off ramp and head on back to Alabama. And that's what we did. So we come flying up the off-ramp, and I guess I can remember him putting it into third gear to kind of gear it down a little bit, to slow it down as we went up. And as we went up the off-ramp, there were two brown Georgia State Patrol cars sitting there, one in each lane as we went up. So we didn't have any choice but to stop or we were going to hit them. And so right there's what we did. He hit the brakes, and we did stop there. And we had to wait on this other Georgia State Patrol that we had passed several miles back up the road. We had to wait on him to get there. Of course, he was talking back and forth over the radio. What we found out is they had actually sent out police and troopers to every off-ramp exit on I-85 for several miles in case we took one that they would have us, and they certainly did. But anyway, let me tell you what happened then. Whoever these first two patrolmen were, they were pretty friendly. They didn't seem upset or mad about anything. They were actually talking about the car and how fast it would run. It was a good-looking car, and just that's what we were pretty much talking about, just first one thing and another. And in just a little while, it took a little while for this other state patrol to catch up, I guess, or to come on the distance that we had gone. And he pulls in behind us, and he's hot. And he's got on one of those little smoky hats, we always called it back then, a little state trooper hat. And he comes storming up to the car, and anyway, he takes his hat off. I don't remember if he put it on the trunk or if he put it on the roof of the car. And in several other words that I'm not going to use, because I do try to keep my videos without any vulgar language or anything in it. But he asked us in no uncertain terms, what were we doing? And JB told him that pretty much the story. He said, well, we had put a new motor in this car a few days ago, and we were just out trying it out. And that looked like that just really made him mad. He just really turned red and all this kind of stuff. And as I said, in no uncertain words, he said, do you know how fast you were going? And JB, I don't know why he said this. He said, no, I couldn't tell how fast I was going. The speedometer hand had already gone out of sight, so I actually couldn't tell how fast I was going down I-85. And then, in some words, as I say, that I won't use, he said we were going 162 miles an hour. And when he told him that, JB said, well, that's probably about right. So we had to sit there for a while and listen to this guy raise Cain about us speeding down I-85, but which I don't blame him at all now, but we were just two young boys out having a good time, and I did manage to finish eating my Hardee's Deluxe. I didn't want to leave that out. While he was sitting there raising Cain, I was finishing eating lunch that day, my French fries, and drinking my Coke and everything. But anyway, he wrote us a ticket. They didn't carry us to jail, which was a good thing. They just wrote us a ticket, and of course, JB had to show back up in court on a certain court day and everything. And that's what I wanted to tell you about that. If you're thinking about getting out on I-85 and opening a car up to just see what it'll do, the fine is pretty good out there. The fine back then, now this was around 1971 to, I don't know, 73 or 4, somewhere along in there was whenever all this took place. The fine back then for speeding on I-85 was $150. And then it was $5 for every mile an hour you were over the 65 or 70 speed limit that you were out there. So we were going 162, and you can do the math on that. Let's just say the speed limit was 70. We were doing 162, so it was $5 per mile an hour that we were over the speed limit. So anyway, that was a pretty high-priced little test drive that we did that afternoon, but it's something that I've always remembered, and I sure won't ever do it again. Even though I didn't have to pay the fine, I just don't have the nerve for that anymore. So now, in closing, I'm bringing the video on to a close. It may have gotten a little bit longer than what I meant for it to, but there was a lot to tell you, and those two last sidetrack stories were something that I have always remembered. Never will forget them. But anyway, I would like to do this entire video in memory of JB's dad, a very good friend of mine, and I was very honored and very saddened to have to be a pallbearer at his funeral. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little Alabama adventure. It was a lot of memories back from the old UFO to some good memories I had with JB and his dad. But anyway, as I always do, I want to bring the video to a close. And as I always do, I want to say hello to my granddaughter, Madison. I also like to tell you that the Alabama Bigfoot Society is run completely out of pocket. And if you're in a position to where you can and where you would like to make a donation, that would be very much appreciated. All you have to do is to go on our website, alabamabigfootsociety.com, and you'll find a place there on the front page to make that donation. And if you will look down in the box below, I have a link to that website. Donation would very much be appreciated. If you like this video, I hope you give us a like. If you like what we're doing and you like these stories and our paranormal investigation and our history and just what all we do down here, then I hope you would subscribe to the channel. And I guess with all that being said, that I'll be looking for you next time on the next Alabama adventure, and Chico and I will see you on down the road.